IVM.
Welcome to another episode of This Round is on Me, where I interact with some of the brightest minds across industries that I know of. I'm Gauri, a restaurateur, entrepreneur, mother, and now a podcaster. Like everything else, the entertainment industry is in a serious state of flux. This has led to a recalibration of all kinds of practices and processes by industry leaders, like my next guest, Siddharth Roy Kapur. He's the founder and MD of Roy Kapur Films and the president of the Producers Guild of India. He's produced blockbusters like The Sky is Pink and the latest Netflix original Ye Ballet, both of which released to great acclaim. His accolades include Variety 500 Global, the Economic Times Top 40 Indian Business Leaders Under 40, and most of all, Vidya Balan's husband. I often tell him that he's my eyes into the real Bollywood, and we have cleaned a bottle or three of champagne over the ups and downs of producer life. But jokes apart, he's one of the most articulate, grounded, and humble people I know. Welcome to the show, Siddharth.
Thanks for having me, Gauri. It's taken a podcast for me to hear you say such nice things about me.
I know.
I'm very happy to be on.
Relish this moment. It's not.
I know it won't happen again. I know.
So, Siddharth, you've had a very interesting career graph, starting from working with P&G to moving to Star TV to moving to Hong Kong. You moved back to Bombay to join Star Plus to market one of the biggest shows of the country, Kaun Banega Crorepati. So moving on, you've had this amazing career with Star, UTV, Walt Disney. How and when did you think that the entertainment bug bit you?
I think pretty early. I don't think I can remember a time that I wasn't completely obsessed by movies and by movie stars and by being up on stage. And, my mum was a dancer and a choreographer. So there were always rehearsals happening at home. So one grew up in an environment where there were always people around you who were artistic and creative. And I remember being taken to movies by my grandparents and my mom and, just sort of soaking it all in very, very early on. So it was sort of an inevitability that I would find my way in some way into something to do with, the movie business and the performing arts.
Okay. So, if I was to focus on your career since you got into production, you've produced so many movies. So how do you decide that the movie is worth producing? If you could take us through the process you follow.
That's a great question. And there's no real science to it, to be honest. But I think over time, you develop some sort of an approach that makes sense to you and seems to hopefully work more often than not. The first thing I think is to just react with your gut completely to a piece of material. So when you're reading a script, you've got to read it as an audience. Is it something that you would want to watch? Is it something that would move you or entertain you or engage you or scare you or thrill you? And only after that do you then, if it does pass, muster on that front, is when you start wearing your producerial hat and start saying, okay, fine. So what's this going to cost to make? What sort of cast am I going to need? What sort of, budgetary constraints will I need to put on it? Is it something that's going to appeal to a larger audience more than just me? I might have liked it, but is it something that an audience will react to? So those are all the, sensible, logical calls that you take after that. But I think your first reaction has got to be instinctive because you're going to be living with that piece of material for at least 2 years in some shape or form, from the, from the rewrites going on to the casting, pre-production, production, post-production. So it better be something that you yourself feel very passionately about.
Yeah. And sort of going back to your career graph, I remember when I left my full-time job to take that plunge into entrepreneurship with Jay. I don't know if I still want to kill him for that or, but, how did you decide to take the plunge? I mean, you've worked with all these fantastic companies and now you've launched, Roy Kapur Films. So what made you, take that plunge, and what's this sort of change been like becoming an entrepreneur and almost, starting your own business from ground zero?
So to start with, just let me say that you should be thanking Jay every day, and I should frankly be thanking him because the table is my favorite restaurant in town, and I'm dying for it to reopen.
Is this because of the introduction I gave you?
Exactly. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Come on. But no, I love the table. So please reopen soon.
Thank you.
But on a separate note, For me, it sort of felt like an organic process. It felt like the next step forward because I'd had a really, interesting career back at UTV and then Disney. And, it just felt like the right time. I'd wanted to do it at a time when I'd felt like I'd been able to, build the relationships, have the experience, feel the confidence in being able to actually set out and do it on my own. Because it's always different when you've got the structure of an organization around you, you've got a team around you, you've got processes that have been built up over the years. Even if you've helped in building those processes, you've still been an employee, right? And however much we say intrapreneurship, I mean, at the end of the day, your paycheck is coming into the bank every month, right?
There's a sense of security, which
there is. There is. So all those years that I worked with Ronnie at UTV, I mean, one felt very entrepreneurial because we were encouraged and challenged to take decisions on our own and then sink or swim with them, etc., etc. But we were still employees. But, it just felt like it was the right time. We'd just completed Dangal. That was the last movie that I did. It just felt like, it was the right time to leave on a high. And it felt like the next logical step forward. But it isn't. I mean, it is challenging. Being an entrepreneur means actually the buck genuinely stops with you in the true sense of the word. And, the last 3 years have been a great learning curve in that sense.
So, I mean, tell me a bit more about that. So, what is, what is this? How was it different for you? Of course, yes, for every entrepreneur, like you said, the buck stops with you. You have to take full responsibility for everything that happens. And you're more than just focusing on a specific role. You're now responsible for an organization and every aspect of it. But, what is the big learning for you? Bringing, that you bring to a business where you are now producing films independently?
Sure. I have to say the years of experience of having been the MD and the CEO of a company before that did give me the ability to be able to think across the organization, et cetera, et cetera. So those were not new things to me. I think what was new to me was a very real sense that I've taken a personal responsibility for these team members that have been passionate enough and loyal enough to come on board with me and want to take this journey with me. There's a very personal sense of responsibility for the team, number one. And number two, you're venturing out on your own to work with people you've worked with before, but in a capacity that now is very different because you're not, you don't have the weight of a Walt Disney company or a UTV behind you. You're now going out as an individual in your own right. And therefore, how are people going to react to you as that? How is that reception going to be? So that little bit of trepidation about that, which, I mean, I have to say I've been lucky enough for that not to have been a hindrance and for people to want to come and work with me. But, you are on pins and needles a little bit. You are a little bit, just sort of wondering how it's going to go. And there's a sense of excitement in that, but it is a little scary too.
Yeah. So, coming to the current scenario, I still remember the day when, the government of Maharashtra announced a complete lockdown of public places like restaurants and theaters, back in March. These led to, not just the shutdown of theaters countrywide, but also a halt in production of, several film series, web series, ads, etc. And I believe now sort of shoots have resumed with a limited crew. But, how do you see this new normal sort of having an impact on production planning and content strategy for shows and movies?
Again, I mean, if I had, if I could say with any certainty that I have an answer to that, I don't, because I think we're just figuring it out as we're going along right now. I mean, we're very thankful to the government for having instituted standard operating procedures for us to operate within and allow us to resume shoots. But as we've seen in the last few weeks, the few TV shoots that have resumed have had, sort of cases that have come up on those sets and they've had to be shut down. And I think that is the new normal, which is quite abnormal. I mean, it's just not a situation to be something that you can be comfortable with, to have your set shut down because someone has contracted something and have everyone tested and then them coming back with the full knowledge that it could happen again in a couple of days is not a very, conducive feeling to a creative art form, especially because you need people to be creative. You need people to be inspired. Yeah. And, actors have said that they found it tough to learn their lines, they're just wondering what they've touched or who's touched them, or, it's just not a very sort of conducive atmosphere for creation.
Right.
So it's going to take a little while, I think, for all of us to adjust to it and to come to terms with what the new normal is, till there's a vaccine or a cure, which I think is a while away.
Yeah.
So we need to do it very cautiously.
Obviously you've launched films on the, big screen as well as directly, through streaming platforms. So, obviously everyone is, streaming has kind of taken over people's lives in the last few months, especially, but it is changing the shape of, media and entertainment even long before, lockdown. And, so how do you sort of figure out, how do you kind of straddle between the big screen and the small screen, so to speak? And, how is that something that you, when you launched your production company, that you went in, sort of knowing that there are sort of two very, predominant platforms, and, how do you kind of approach both of them when it comes to your productions?
No, for sure. I think even before the sort of crisis that we're in right now, it was pretty obvious that the theatrical business is definitely going to be going through a bit of a churn with respect to the fact that, yes, people are definitely going to be going into the cinemas and will continue to do so even after this. But what type of movies are they going to be going to watch? Because they've now gotten used to the fact that at the flick of a switch, they can have access to any content from around the world as well as from India. The fresh content from India as well is going to be available to them within 8 weeks on an OTT platform. So to lure them into the cinemas, in any case, it was going to have to be something that was so cinematic in the experience that you just could not help but watch it on the screen.
So that was exactly my next question, actually. I'm sorry to butt in, but cinematography has been a critical element for movies, and, it's most effective on the big screen, right? So with movies now releasing directly on the small screen and OTT platforms, how does your focus on this production change? Because, I'll just give you an analogy with our business. We've obviously launched with delivery, etc., in the lockdown, and the whole mindset is different when you are doing delivery versus serving food in a restaurant, because, it's almost like comfort food versus celebratory food, or even in terms of presentation. So that's how I think about it when it comes to, it's not just about the size of the screen. There's a whole different offering almost when it's on the big screen versus a small screen. So, how do you think about that as a producer?
It's a great question. And I think cinematographers have been grappling with exactly that over the last few years, because when you have to come to terms with the fact that, they always knew their film would be seen on the screen first and then would go to television and OTT, etc. But now when they realize that actually this film is never going to be seen on a big screen, it's always going to be either like a device in someone's hand or projected onto a screen at home. Therefore, what sort of shot taking should we be doing? What should our lighting technique be, going forward? Because it's not going to be a darkened auditorium anymore when it's first watched. Should we be looking at more close-ups and mid-shots rather than long shots? Should we be looking at lighting our artists differently? What sort of framing should we be doing in order for it to be most conducive to the smallest device possible? So those are all questions that just a cinematographer has got to answer. And then therefore, in the same way, every crew member has got to think differently. I don't think we've been having that much of those conversations yet, at least in India. Right now, it's just been about much more about the writing, because the formatting is now so different.
Create the content in the first place.
Create the content in the first place and create it the way that you would do it for the large screen.
Right.
But I think increasingly, as things evolve and we get more and we get better telling stories for like an OTT platform, the way that the West has, these are things that will come up more and more.
Yeah. So, another aspect of production is obviously marketing, right? So, how do you even have to think about that differently when it comes to big screen versus small screen? Of course, I assume, marketing is moving to a digital platform. You've been a marketer from, the beginning of your career. So can you just sort of take us through how you've seen it evolve over the years and where it's going, but also how do you differentiate? If you think about the amount of content coming out now, if I just look at the current times where and the OTT platform and the amount of content coming out on that from all over the world, right? Like now it's not even just about India anymore. It's you're being thrown content from all over the world. And your audience now is also all over the world, right? It's not just local streams. And so, how does your sort of thought process towards marketing change with that scenario?
So I think the biggest change is really about, in movies, it's all about that release date. You're directing people to a release date and you're saying that is the day the movie releases in cinemas, so go for it. Yeah. And then the assumption is that then things just play themselves out and the movie sinks or swims depending on the content of the film.
But do you feel that that's changing now with the format changing of,
It is for sure. So now it's about, it's streaming from this date onwards, and then it's a living, breathing thing that's there forever.
Exactly.
On that platform,
Exactly.
Versus something that would be going off in 8 weeks from a cinema hall. So you've got to now think about being able to create the excitement around the characters, around the show, being able to sustain and keep marketing it across the time that it's, it's not just about driving that release date.
It's not a burst of,
It's not, because I think we've all of us who've grown up in film marketing, for all of us, it's about push that release date.
Yeah.
That is the day we want our big opening. Yeah. We get our big opening, we get the sampling, and then obviously then the content has to speak for itself, right? But with streaming, it's about, being able to create that excitement because you'll have multiple seasons maybe of a series, right?
Yeah.
And you want to, you want to actually have that be, so it's got to be a long-term marketing campaign for a series versus just pushing a release date as it is for a film.
But what about when it comes to films? I mean, where people may not watch it, like that whole release date is not, of course it's there and you'll see a burst when it comes onto the platform. But people could pick something up a year later even, So how do you do that with films where there isn't necessarily continuity, in the form of season 2 and season 3, etc.? So
I think honestly, the marketing is done by the platforms in this case. It's not done by the producers. But just putting on my hat of, if I was at a platform like a Netflix or like an Amazon or, whatever it may be, they've got to actually keep marketing. One is that the algorithm does it for them to a certain extent, and it directs the types of audiences that would enjoy that content to that content, because finally that content is available on the platform. And if you're the type of viewer that they know will gravitate towards it, then they make sure that appears on your home screen and keeps sort of popping up. But I think the other thing is that if they're looking at that as an acquisition device to get more subscribers in, then they've got to be pushing that really hard in their communication for a long period of time from the time that it launches on the platform. Right. So there are two approaches to it, depending on some pieces of content they take on purely because they want to add to the weight of the platform. And that's more loyalty building exercise. But some they take on because they believe that they'll get a horde of new subscribers coming on because it's this high profile, big film that they're releasing on the platform. So they look at it in those two ways.
So a lot of these, platforms that we're talking about, they've been creating their original series for the US market for a few years now. And, consumers have been used to releasing the whole series and binge watching the content. So why do you think, India's relatively has lesser shows and innovation when it comes to creating content for the masses?
Well, we've actually jumped from just films and daily shows straight to creating these high quality digital series, right? Mm-hmm. In the West, they had a process of the last 20 years where they went from hardcore network television onto the HBO kind of content, then onto the OTT kind of content. And that's happened over a period of time. It's happened organically. But like with most things in India, we skip multiple generations and just jump straight to where they're at right now. And honestly, so now we're figuring it out as we go along. No one's been trained in the art of writing for a 10 episode, one season format that goes on across 5 seasons. It's just not happened before. But I think we've got so much talent around that they've figured out a way to be able to figure it out and do it in our own, jugadu way. We've managed to find a way to make it happen. But I think over a period of time, there'll have to be some institutionalized learning where writers can actually learn the art, because it's an art of just, luxuriating in the unfolding of a story in a very different way than you would with a 2-hour film. And you've
Yeah.
got, I mean, it's very enjoyable for a writer also, but once they have their head around how it's done, and there is an art and a science to doing it, is when I think we'll be able to realize the full potential of this new medium, because it's like a novel. You're being able to tell a story across, space and time, across multiple hours, across many years. It's a gift to be able to do that today. But
Well, that's the
I
thing.
don't think we've gotten our hands around it.
That's the thing.
Yet.
People are still trying to figure out what works and doesn't.
Yeah.
So, what's your ethos in terms of what you want to do in the digital space, like personally?
I think the key would be to tell really rooted Indian stories for the Indian audience, if that's the idea and that's the agenda of the platforms, and to be able to tell them in a way that these are living, breathing characters that people want to keep coming back to. I think characters in series are the most important, right? Because you're allowing them into your home, they're with you for hours on end. They've got to be attractive, engaging, fascinating, for you to want to keep living with them across, multiple seasons. So I think that's the most important thing as far as we're concerned. And I think the other thing that we want to do with digital is really be able to take Indian content out to the world as well, and be able to really tell those stories that need to be told. Because we've had, in the last so many years, we've had people from the outside coming in and telling us our own stories. I think it's important that we tell the world our stories ourselves at some point of time.
Right. And the Indian audience is frankly all over the world. So, even if it's something that it's not restricted to this country, and just like Hollywood is kind of, marketed itself and presented itself, globally, I think the, at least Indian production has that advantage of having an audience, spread out throughout the world.
But the irony is that audience wants to watch completely desi content. They don't want to pay because they've got this whole thing about being away from the country and wanting to enjoy what they left behind, right? So I think we've been victims of our own success in a way, because we have this captive audience. It exists, and we are catering to it, right? With our hardcore, Bollywood content, and we've catered to it forever. But that's also not given us the hunger to reach out to a larger audience, because we've never had to. And I think it's important that we consciously, at least while catering to this audience and doing what we can for them, look at least a couple of projects where we can take things out to the world.
So, where do you see the future consumer going to view content? Let's be honest here. Yes, cinemas are temporarily, out of commission. But when it comes to you actually thinking about the way forward for your production house, where do you see the future consumer going?
One can't tell what new form of technology will erupt and where people will be able to find. With AR and your VR coming up in the way that they are, you can have 3D renditions of content that people are carrying around with them, and they've got stories playing out around them as they're moving, in a bus or in a train or wherever it is. They've actually physically got characters. They're wearing those, goggles, and they've got characters around them. So that's one thing. But I think the focus for us has got to be to just tell great stories with great characters in them. We'll be able to figure out distribution as we go along, and water will find its own level, and one piece of content will go here and one will go there. But I think for us, we shouldn't lose sight of great plot, great character, great story, and then be able to find the medium that's the best way to tell it. Quibi is this thing that just started in the US. It's not met with a great reception yet, but I think the idea was really interesting, where they were creating only short format content. So they were doing multiple seasons of shows, but every episode was only 8 minutes or 6 minutes, right? Because their whole logic was that people just enjoy bite-sized content today, and let's give it to them. Now, they launched in the pandemic. Maybe that was not the best time to launch, because people were not commuting as much. People have more time. They can watch longer, things anyway. But I guess my point is that these things will keep coming up, and you'll keep having people finding new ways of distribution and duration. The key is always going to be the characters and the stories.
Okay. But theatre is still there. Cinemas are here to stay. They're not going anywhere, is the point. Yeah.
Well, as a cinema junkie and someone who's obsessed with the medium, I really hope not. I think not too.
But you have to understand there's also a new generation, right? I mean, I'm not sort of with no implication of your age or anything, but there's a new generation that
none taken. Thank you, Gauri.
There's a new generation that maybe isn't as into going into cinemas and things, and is kind of almost satisfied with the smaller format, smaller screen format. So it's something that we can't deny, and
no, you can't deny it. But the irony is that, I mean, in the US, which is a market which is changing really fast, and you've got the whole millennials coming in, and there's gaming, and there's every conceivable new form of distribution of content is available. You haven't seen theatrical revenue decline over the last few years. In fact, you've seen it grow. Okay. The funny part though is, and which is where the big films are getting bigger and the small films are just getting decimated, right? So it's like if the next Avengers is coming out or the next Avatar is coming out, that's going to do like $2 billion and that's the film that people will come out for. But the really good comedy or drama has all moved to OTT. They're not coming to the cinema hall to watch.
Well, so again, that's the whole point. Anymore. It's production value, right? It's almost like when you've got this great production, you don't want to waste it on the small screen, right? I know, like, for example, and it's also it's a bit of a legacy thing. Like they I think delayed the release of the new James Bond film, which was sort of due to release like earlier this year, and they just said that with all this going on, it's not something that you would say, okay, let's just release it on.
Well, the film was called No Time to Die as well. So that was probably not the best film to release this year.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
So much for forward thinking. Okay, so listen, I'm gonna ask you something a little more controversial or not. I think Bollywood for you has been, it's been a family business almost, with your, like you said, your mother being in, a dancer, right? And
but not in Hindi films. It was on stage, and she was a choreographer of like sort of fashion shows, etc. So
okay, well, your brothers then, okay, both your brothers being actors and things. So I sort of want to touch on this subject of nepotism, which has been obviously in the news a lot. And if I was to kind of draw a parallel with, industrial businesses, we see that it exists even there in a way with family businesses, right? Where the baton gets passed on to, the next generation, which may not actually be the right person to sort of take over a business, but, that's just how it's been working. And, so what's your view on this? Is it just something that, guys just learn to live with it because this is, the way it works, in life? Or do you actually feel that to some extent it's been a hurdle, to producing quality content for viewers?
So just speaking about it in two parts. I mean, one, since you mentioned me and my brothers, the great part, I think, as far as we're concerned, is each of us came into this business completely independently. And whatever we did within it was done completely on our own. So, I mean, my brothers...
So I wasn't suggesting that there was nepotism within the family.
No, I know you weren't.
It's an example of a family where it's, like you said, it's just happened.
Where we've all, it just happened that we all were, we gravitated towards this business. We all obviously were there to help and support each other in sort of a personal capacity. But professionally, we've actually made it a point not to work together because it's just a healthier environment.
Yes. Yeah.
But Gauri, I mean, like you said, it's such a inane concept to even be discussing because it's so obviously there, whether it's in our industry or whether it's in any field around the world. I mean, you've got political dynasties, you've got business dynasties, you've got it in every area. You've got it in the mafia. Yeah. You have it everywhere, right? So I wonder why we're even discussing it, because it's a fact of life that everyone's grown up with and we know that it exists. Having said that, I think the beautiful part of the film business is that only success speaks, right? You can be anyone's son or anyone's daughter. The audience is not going to love you because of that. They're going to love you because they love you or they don't, right? And sure, you will get a foot in the door. There's no doubt that you'll get opportunities that others might not even have access to. That's a fact of life, and life's not fair. Life is what it is. But it's not like those people are going to become successful actors or directors or
Just by
producers
virtue of
because
that.
just by virtue of their birth. And on the other hand, there will always be people who will enter from completely, the outside and come in and rule the industry. And we've seen that happen time and time again. So the only currency that speaks in this business is commercial success. And I think that's great because everyone knows the score. You just know that that's
there has to be talent at the end of the day, and which translates into commercial success. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter.
See, I'm not even saying talent, because talent is a subjective, thing.
I mean,
There'll be some people who are commercially
successful.
Exactly. Yeah. Because there'll be some who you and I feel are supremely talented, but have not got their due in inverted commas. But the audience doesn't feel that they, deserve it. So that's a fact of life.
Yeah. But is that something that you've had to grapple with? I mean, is it a challenge for you in your, has it been a challenge for you?
Frankly, no. And that's probably because I worked within an organization. I worked within a company like UTV where Ronnie actually came into the business completely from the outside.
Right.
And, said that he was this boy from South Bombay who wanted to come into the film industry and make movies. And we all rode on his coattails in that sense. And it was great because we had a great ride and we got the experience of being able to enter this very closed industry, at least at that point of time. I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, and be able to actually come in here and make movies and make relationships and be able to build our own, sort of place within it.
Yeah.
And after that, I think it's just been the relationships one has built with actors and directors and producers and crew members, etc., over the years, and the experiences that we've had working with each other that then becomes your route to doing more and more films. Yeah. So I have to say it's not something that's affected me personally.
Okay. So, I want to sort of talk about you more as an entrepreneur, and, what sort of inspires you and what fuels you to do everything that you do?
I think being able to put out something really great into the world. I mean, that's really what and that just endures and lives, and that affects people's lives in some way. And I think with entertainment, we have a chance to do that because it's something that people never forget. They never forget the emotion that they felt when they loved something really deeply that was a piece of entertainment. Just being able to be a part of the process of creating that gives me a great thrill. I mean, I remember when we released Rang De Basanti, which was the first big film that I'd been involved in. And we did these city visits across the country, right? And those were the early days of city visits. You didn't normally do that. And we were doing that after the release of the film. And we'd enter at the end of the film when the credits were rolling and just come up on stage and then interact with the audience. And when I was seeing they'd obviously been tear-soaked faces and people breaking down and crying. And I was like, how great is it to be able to be involved in something that does that to people, It was a very real feeling.
So, I mean, what would you say is your success mantra, if you had to kind of sum it up?
I'd probably say the harder you work, the luckier you get. Because I really don't believe in this concept of luck and destiny at all. Sure, sometimes you can be in the right place at the right time. But if you try to be in that right place 100 times, the likelihood of you being there that one time when it matters is that much higher. Yeah. So I just think it's about just plugging away and just being resilient and not letting yourself be, cowed down or like sort of beaten down by circumstances. Because like I said, life isn't fair. Life doesn't owe you anything.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And you've just got to keep going if you really want to do something.
I mean, and just like, for us as a restaurateur or for chefs, you kind of win some, you lose some. You have restaurants that are, successful. You have restaurants that aren't. And I know that, for you as a producer, of course, you have films that are huge hits and those that maybe sort of tank at the box office. So can you tell us about like one failure or, a challenging situation in your life and, how you've overcome it? Because, I mean, this business, especially with the kind of financial amounts that you're dealing with, I mean, it can be hugely stressful. So I mean, how do you deal with the sort of, I'm sure, like plenty of ups and downs that happen in your business?
So, it's interesting you mention the restaurant business, because I think the two businesses are very similar in the sense that the success and the failure are both very public, and you can't hide it,
Right.
right? It's out
Exactly.
there. It's like
Exactly.
if you were a parts manufacturer and were making some components for alloys of something or whatever, and your business was doing badly, no one would have to know, right? You
Yeah.
could just put up this face and go out and about and be. But when a movie flops or your restaurant's not doing well, everyone knows and you can't hide it. And it's public and people want to talk about it. And some luxuriate in the fact that, it's probably not doing well, because they know that when your successes are that public, it's always interesting to see
It's
people
great.
whose
Yeah.
failures are public too. But I think it's just about having to be resilient. Yeah. And I've had so many examples of movies that one has been deeply sort of passionate about and loved very, very much from the get-go, that have just not worked at all.
Hmm.
Times when it's been, tough within organizations also, because you're working with tight cash flows, then you've got a situation. I think it's about just having to develop that thick hide and just keep going, because it's very public, and it's
Yeah.
not easy to hide away from and to like sort of push away. So you use self-deprecating humor and all that. That's all fine. Those are your defense mechanisms. But at the end of it, it hurts. And because it's something you've been involved in and something that's meant something to you and that people are, know about and maybe enjoying. So you've just got to develop a thick hide and keep going. And
Yeah.
that's just, and keep talking to yourself and talking yourself out of whatever mental state you might find yourself in at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sort of, it helps if firstly, yeah, it's, you accept that it's part of life. It's not something that you're always going to have, everything's going to be, ultra successful every time. And I mean, I speak about it from the perspective of, our restaurant, which, the second restaurant, which didn't do as well as we anticipated. And of course, there's a, feeling of being misunderstood and, all of that. But I think that, it was an incredible learning experience for me. And I knew exactly, it kind of reinforced what I, was doing correctly, but without realizing it, it sort of reinforced that, no, that is actually the way. And, so I think that you kind of, like you said, you can't take yourself too seriously also, beyond the point. And, but it is, it's something that is not everyone has that perspective. And, it's a very unfortunate but important reality that we're hit with today, which is that a lot of people do face, mental health issues because of what, what they sort of the situations they find themselves in. And
I think it's really important to, to know that failure is an event. It's not a person, right?
Right.
A person will go through multiple events that are failures in their lives, but that doesn't mean they need to look at themselves as a failure.
Yeah.
They've got to just figure that, fine, I need to learn. I need to figure out what went wrong. I need to mourn it, give myself that time to mourn it also, and not just brush it under the carpet, and then move on. It's easier said than done. It's not, and especially in professions, like I said, where the failure is public, it's that much more difficult. But, if you've signed up for that, then that's, you just have to go through it.
So, I mean, how do you deal with anxiety and stress? Because I know that there's plenty of that, other than coming to the table and guzzling champagne. How do you deal with sort of that anxiety and stress?
I find that 1 hour walk in the morning without any devices and without anything with you, where you're just letting your thoughts wander wherever they may go, that helps me a lot. And I realize when I don't do it, I tend to become more drawn out and a little more tense if I'm going through a tough period. And when I do, I'm able to talk myself. I might not come up with solutions or anything like that. I might, and I do sometimes, but sometimes it's just about letting all those sparks just go off within your brain, those, things that just need to express themselves and be something that you're conscious of. That really helps me. So that's the one thing that, I try not to compromise on. I'm not always good at sticking to it, but I realize that helps me. So that's just my, and then of course, just talking it out with people close to you, being able to have that discussion and saying what you're feeling. Not always easy to do because it depends on the kind of person you are. You might not be a person who even wants to verbally express, when they're going through a tough time.
Yeah.
And then just, trying to unwind and enjoy yourself if you can.
Yeah. And sort of how have you been, how is this, the lockdown kind of been for you in terms of, work, but, and just how are you coping with it?
I'm fine, actually. I really can't complain. I mean, everything that we've been working on is still going.
Yeah.
It's just about being delayed. There's been a fair amount of development work that's happened within, the company as well. Sometimes you do wonder about, okay, I'm reading the script. When will this ever happen? When will we ever put this on the floors? But then you just have to snap yourself back and say, okay, fine, now just keep going. And personally, it's been great. We've been watching, shows, watching movies, just chilling out, spending time together. If you finally figure out a way that you find your own spaces, in the day when you get your alone time, when you come together without even anything being said.
Yeah.
And just talking to friends a lot more. Actually, our school gang has never been so active, interested in what's happening with each other than we've been now. And just connecting with people, having a chat, just talking rubbish.
Yeah.
It's been fine. I mean, great. I have to say it's been okay.
Yeah. Slowing down has been good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Roy, we're entering the last segment of our show, which is the rapid fire round, my favorite bit.
Oh, God.
I know I have to do this to you. all the torture you've put me through.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions and just say the first thing that comes to your mind. What's your comfort food? Something you can eat every day. This is just like my little personal research.
Probably pizza.
Okay. The genre of movies you love and your favorite movie of all time.
Romance and drama. Pyasa and Sholay. It's a tie between the two.
Okay. Do you cry while watching films?
I do.
Really? I don't believe that.
It's a sickness. I'm a very, very easy crier.
Okay. What's the best book you've read this year?
I've been very delinquent this year, but I have to now plug for a show that I'm doing. The best book I've read in the last 6 months has been The Anarchy by William Dalton.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that, by the way.
That should be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be huge.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yes. Any sort of, who have you been like your role models or mentors? Anyone you want to sort of give a shout out to?
So other than sort of people in the family, I'd say probably Alec Padamsee and Ronnie Screwvala have been the two people in my life that I've looked up to a lot. I've had the good fortune of working with both of them. And Alec, just purely because he was able to, juggle two lives simultaneously, the theater as well as advertising. And it just, growing up, it just felt so inspirational that this guy's got two careers going at the same time and one feeds into the other. And it's so interesting how he's able to do both. And Ronnie, for his sheer audacity in the way that he dreams and just makes things happen. I mean, he just, decides that he's going to do something and then just goes out there and does it, and has very little regard for institutions and personalities involved, etc. When he just goes in there with his battering ram and makes things happen. So that's been great to have a ringside view of.
Yeah, I agree. Your message or advice to the young leaders?
Self-belief, I think, is one thing that if you can inculcate, it will really serve you in pretty much in any situation you find yourself in. I think it's really important to respect yourself and trust yourself and back your instincts.
Okay, that sounds good. Something I need to keep hearing as well, as we keep plunging into project after project.
We all do from time to time.
Anyway, listen, thank you so much for being part of the show. It's been great chatting, and if not, like I said, over a glass of wine or a lamb shank, but
yes, but hopefully soon.
But hopefully soon, and all the best with everything that's in the pipeline. And thank you again. It was great having a chat, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Gauri. Great fun.
Thank you. I'm sure we're all waiting for the next season of our favorite Netflix show. One thing with this conversation with Siddharth has reassured me is that the show will go on. Whether we're going to hygiene-friendly theatres or staying at home and streaming content, the entertainment will continue.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Intel, for supporting us. Great week on the network. If you haven't been listening, why haven't you been listening? You should be listening. Rohan Joshi was on Uncle Please Sid, discussed the toxicity of the Indian pop culture. Really fun conversation to listen to. Rajiv Samant, the founder of Sula Wines, was on Cyrus Says. Again, I think that was a fun conversation. Also want to call out the season finale of Yuddha. Yuddha is our military history podcast. Definitely do check that out. It's a really great listen. And finally, I want to just remind you all that, it's a dark time, but if you need a smile, go check out the Smile India podcast by Shifa Mehta. It's in both English and Hindi, and I think that you will really enjoy the kinds of things that she's talking about there. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, this is Ashish Vidyarthi. Yes, my friend, these are challenging times, but in these challenging times, we can create something extraordinary. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey, available on the IVM Podcast, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, we have a great opportunity called life. Cheers.